How long would you fight to survive in an utterly hopeless situation? 10 years ago, I would have read a book like The Martian and thought, yeah, I could do that. Um, but now I'm in my 30s and proud of myself if I make it through a Saturday without taking a nap. It's a testament to Andy Weir's talent as an author that this purely fictional story manages to be inspirational as we watch the protagonist's persistence in the face of tremendous adversity. It gives this otherwise hard sci-fi novel a layer of heart just underneath the surface that it does manage to be like truly inspiring despite being totally fake. The Martian is the debut novel of Andy Weir. It was originally self-published in 2011 as a series of blog posts, which I think is so crazy. It was then picked up and packaged and published as a book in 2014, and as you very likely know, in 2015 it was made into a major motion picture starring Matt Damon. I think that reading about Andy Weir's life, you can see that the author must have demonstrated a lot of the persistence in his own career that our protagonist demonstrates in The Martian, because Andy had to write for decades and decades before meeting with financial success that would enable him to make creative writing his full-time job. The Martian is Robinson Crusoe on Mars. It is a survival story about an astronaut who becomes stranded on Mars and is desperately trying to make it home. It is science fiction in that there is technology we don't currently have, but Andy Weir was clearly trying to stick as close to our actual technology as possible. So really the only thing that feels out of step with our current technology is the fact that we're managing to send these like bare bones manned missions to Mars, which my understanding is we're fairly close to being able to do. So this isn't sci-fi like Star Trek is sci-fi. This is a hard sci-fi near future story about a American astronaut becoming stranded on Mars and then fighting against all odds to endure on Mars. He is a botanist and an engineer. And the botanist element gets a lot of play, but really it's the fact that he's an engineer that enables him to exist by himself on the harsh Martian surface. I feel like I learned not only about space, but also about farming, which I did not expect. This book is primarily structured as a series of the protagonist, Mark Watney's, log entries. At the end of a day, he makes an entry saying, here's what I did today. A single chapter will consist of half a dozen to a dozen log entries, maybe even more sometimes, and then occasionally the book cuts to omniscient third-person narration to let you know what's going on back on Earth, and then sometimes to just give big picture ideas of what's going on. And that the interplay between the real-time log entries and the omniscient third-person narrator creates tension in the story, because there's lots of books that are structured as a first-person narration of past events, but it's the narrator is speaking from some time after those events have concluded, which, like, for instance, Lovecraft, a lot of his stories, that's how they're told, is some version of the narrator recounting some ordeal he went through in the past. But what that structure does is tell you clearly the narrator survived because the narrators lived to tell the story. That is not the case when the structure is a series of log entries happening in real time, because with each log entry, you don't know if there's going to be another. He's telling you what he did earlier today. He's not telling you about his time back on Mars. And so that introduces a lot of tension into the story. So let's start with the good. This book starts with a bang. There's so many books I read, I don't know what the book's even about until I'm 50 or even 100 pages into the meat of the book. This book, not the case. Within the opening paragraphs, you immediately understand what this book is going to be about, and it delivers on that promise. It delivers, it understood the assignment, Robinson Crusoe on Mars. And that's the story you get. And it's great. And it's great for a lot of reasons. And one of them is that Andy Weir took the time to do his research. You can't, unless you already know a lot about the current technology that the space missions use. It's really hard to distinguish what's true from what's made up. Like, I couldn't tell you which parts of the technology referenced in The Martian are what we currently have, and which parts are inventions of Andy Weir in order to enable us to get to Mars. And I think that's a testament to how well Andy did in learning about all these things. And by the way, by trade, he is a software engineer and a computer scientist. He is not an astronaut who learned all these things just naturally through work. No, he had to go out and learn all of this in order to write this book. And I think that's so cool and so impressive. And it makes it really fun because you feel like you're being entertained and you feel a little smarter when you're done reading it. One of the book's strengths is that Mark Watney is a likable guy. He's a guy you want to spend 500 pages with. And honestly, the readability of this book totally depends on Andy Weir being able to make Watney a charismatic protagonist. And he succeeds. Another thing that I have to praise this book for is just that it manages to be so entertaining and it moves at a really good pace, which this book was given to me by a friend years ago, and it's been recommended to me by many different people for a long time, and I only just now read it. And the reason I've been avoiding it is because it's the story of a guy stranded alone in essentially a frozen, lifeless wasteland. One dude alone on the surface of Mars. And it's, in my version, in my copy, it's 500 pages. They're small pages, but still, it's 500 pages. And that pitch just did not sound that exciting to me. Like, 500 pages of a guy in a lifeless desert? But no, it's great. Andy Weir manages to make it move at a really good pace from the get-go. And it pretty much never lets up, and then it ends. And it ends at the perfect time. It does not overstay its welcome. And I know that because when I finished it, I kind of had that tinge of sadness where I was like, oh, I could have done another chapter or two. Like, it left me wanting a little bit more. Now, the bad. Honestly, I don't have a lot of negative criticism for this book. The only truly negative thing that I would say is about a third or 3/4 of the way through the book, Mark Watney decides to undertake a project where he is going to manufacture a bedroom for a longish upcoming planned trip. And in making that bedroom, he has to take some incredible risks. And relative to the things we have seen him survive up to that point, to suddenly be doing something that feels so incredibly risky while also being, strictly speaking, unnecessary. Like, this isn't a survival thing. This is a luxury comfort thing. It feels odd within the context of the story and all the stakes for Mark and others with everything going on. It doesn't seem, I don't know if I want to say it's not believable. It just seems like a poor choice to suddenly risk absolutely everything in order to have some temporary luxury. Luxury being that's maybe a misuse of the word luxury, but you get what I'm saying. Another observation, and whether or not this is a criticism, whether or not this is a good thing or a bad thing, just depends on your preferences as a reader. But despite the fact that this book, it consists almost entirely of us stranded with one human being and watching that human being endure just the most discouraging circumstances imaginable. Despite that, this book is not a character piece. It is not, Andy Weir is not primarily interested in exploring like the mental toll of what happens to a person in isolation in the face of seemingly hopeless odds. No, Andy Weir is interested in like the science and the problem solving element of the story. It's like, it's a puzzle box. It's an escape game. It's, here is a seemingly impossible situation. How can we, with as much real science as possible, find a way out of this horribly difficult circumstance? And for that reason, it's wonderfully interesting. I think plenty of readers would be bored to tears if it were more of a character piece. But I think it's worth noting that this isn't, that's just not what this book is or what it cares about. And so, if you could argue that maybe it rings a little less true because Mark Watney manages to stay pretty much relentlessly optimistic through everything. However, I think that it's totally justifiable by the fact that it is a series of log entries. We are not getting to see into his mind. We're reading his journal. And it's a journal he knows is going to become public. And he even mentions that he needs to be careful about what he writes because it will become public. So, for that reason, you could easily say that, yes, of course, Mark Watney did despair. He did become hopeless at times. We just don't get to see that because he chose not to include that in the log entries that he knew the whole world would read one day. Totally fair. Okay, so themes. Every book has its messages and themes, and this one is no exception. The Martian, as I've hammered at throughout this whole review, is all about persistence and determination. It might be the case that survival comes down to the will to survive, to endure, and that as long as you're breathing, as long as your heart is still beating, you have a fighter's chance. And as long as you just keep pushing ahead and pushing ahead, success isn't guaranteed. But what is guaranteed is that if you give up, you fail. Another theme would just be like loyalty. Certain individuals in the story do make a sacrifice that I consider a phenomenal sacrifice, and it honestly reminds me of the old line, like, it's easy to die for a cause, it's hard to live for a cause. So similarly, it's on paper, maybe it's easy to die for someone, but can you live to save someone? The book ends with an observation about how there's this natural and universal human instinct to try to help other humans. And so you could say that that's a theme of the book because the book seems to think it is, but I don't see that coming through. Like when you're reading it, I don't think the book seeps with altruism, mostly to the extent we're getting shots of people back on Earth. We have a lot of career-driven people making career-driven decisions. Not that they're not worried about the survival of this man. Of course they are. But how worried they are depends on their relationship to Mark Watney. And I see loyalty. I don't see like some sort of universal instinct to be altruistic and help others. So who should read The Martian? If you like hard sci-fi, then this is an easy recommendation. And by hard sci-fi, I mean a science fiction book that is interested in real science and playing with real scientific ideas. Hard sci-fi does not mean difficult. This book is a very easy read. I would classify The Three Body Problem and The Martian are both hard sci-fi, but in terms of difficulty, Three Body Problem way more difficult than The Martian. This book is also perfect for people who are fans of survival stories. If you like Robinson Crusoe or Castaway or The Swiss Family Robinson, then I definitely think you should read this book. Finally, if you're interested in space exploration, I definitely think you should read this book. So my rating is 7 out of 10 bike horns. If I personally were passionate about space exploration, that rating would be even higher. I'm not quite the target audience for this book. I mean, I am in that I enjoy good books, and this is a good book, but I would enjoy it even more if the subject matter was something that I really cared about. With that in mind, I could easily see this book being a lifelong favorite for many readers, and I think it's a pretty easy recommendation to a pretty wide audience. And of course, we can't go anywhere without briefly reviewing this cover. For me, it's a little too photorealistic, and I like books to let everything stay in my imagination as much as possible. The busyness of New York Times bestseller and now a major motion picture, it's just busyness. I'd do without it if I could. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. One of my dreams when I started this channel was to make a subset of videos where I compare books to their movie adaptations because I think it's endlessly fascinating the decisions the directors and screenwriters make when they adapt a book into a movie because they change not only the plot but the actual message. They change what the heart of the story is. Not always, but in many cases. And I think that's fun to explore. So, to that end, in addition to my weekly book review videos, I will be releasing a video at some point in the next month comparing the book The Martian to The Martian, the movie, starring Matt Damon. So, if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please consider subscribing. If you liked this video, please give it a like because the AI decides what we all get to see, but it lets us vote.